A map should only show the world its maker knew. Some ancient charts break this fundamental rule. This video presents 15 specific maps that contain impossible geography, knowledge their creators should not have possessed. By the end, you will see the documented evidence that could rewrite chapters of our global history. How did a Turkish admiral in 1513 draw Antarctica, a continent not found for 3 more centuries? Why do medieval sketches show American coastlines with startling precision? We will examine these artifacts, from vellum sea charts to Korean world maps, that defy simple explanation. They suggest forgotten voyages, lost sources, or civilizations that saw farther than we remember. What does it mean for our story if the past was far more connected than we ever believed? The story truly begins in the dusty archives of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace. The year was 1929, and scholars were sifting through forgotten relics of the Ottoman Empire. Their hands fell upon a fragment of gazelle skin, a map drawn in 1513 by the Turkish admiral and cartographer Piri Reis. At first glance, it was a remarkable artifact of its time, showing the familiar coasts of Europe, Africa, and a portion of the newly discovered Americas. But as researchers looked closer, a chill of disbelief settled in. There, stretching below the Atlantic, was a landmass with a coastline that looked hauntingly familiar, yet was utterly impossible for its era. It appeared to be the northern coast of Antarctica, a continent the world would not find for another 3 centuries. This single piece of parchment became the cornerstone of a historical mystery that refuses to be solved. Piri Reis was not just an artist, he was a scholar of the sea. In his own notes on the map's margins, he openly credited his work to much older sources, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. He wrote of consulting charts drawn by explorers who had seen these lands with their own eyes. This admission is crucial. It means the map is not a wild guess or a prophetic vision, but a compilation, a copy of knowledge that was already ancient in the 1500s. The central, breathtaking claim made by researchers like Professor Charles Hapgood in the mid-20th century is that the land shown is not Antarctica as we see it today, buried under miles of ice, but Antarctica as it might have looked thousands of years ago when its coasts were free and exposed. Hapgood proposed that the map's contours matched the subglacial topography of Queen Maud Land, the true rocky coastline hidden beneath the ice cap, a shape we only confirmed with modern seismic surveys in the 1950s. Think about the staggering implication of that. If this interpretation holds, it suggests that a highly advanced seafaring culture existed in a remote prehistoric era, one capable of mapping a continent during an ice-free period, a window that some geology suggests closed over 6,000 years ago. That knowledge, copied and recopied on perishable materials, somehow survived through millennia, passing from civilization to civilization until a fragment of it landed on Piri Reis's desk. Skeptics, of course, offer alternative readings. They suggest the landmass could be a distorted version of South America or a speculative southern continent, a common cartographic guess of the age. Yet the precise correlation with the subglacial bedrock, a shape no one on Earth could have known in 1513, lingers as a profound anomaly. The Piri Reis map forces a single, uncomfortable question onto the table. What if our timeline of exploration is incomplete and the icy silence of Antarctica holds the memory of much older visitors? The mystery of the Piri Reis map is a puzzle of impossible geography, but the next artifact challenges something even more fundamental: our trust in the historical record itself. In 1957, a discovery was announced that sent shockwaves through the academic world. A map had surfaced not in a royal archive, but through the rare book market, a document that seemed to rewrite the story of the Americas. Known as the Vinland Map, it appeared to be a 15th-century world chart drawn on medieval parchment. Its depiction of Europe, Africa, and Asia was typical for its time, but in the vast Atlantic west of Greenland, it showed a large, unfamiliar island. A label written in medieval Latin gave it a name that resonated with legend, Vinland. This was the name from the Norse sagas, the stories of Leif Eriksson's voyage around the year 1000, a land of wild grapes far to the west. If this map was genuine, it was not just a curious drawing. It was the first known cartographic representation of the New World, created decades before Columbus ever set sail. It was a bombshell, a piece of paper that could demote one of history's most famous explorers from discoverer to a latecomer. The initial examination seemed promising. The parchment was dated to around 1440, and the handwriting style fit the period. For a moment, it looked like conclusive proof that knowledge of the Norse voyages had circulated among European scholars long before 1492. But almost immediately, doubts began to surface. The map had no clear provenance, no documented chain of ownership stretching back to the Middle Ages. It simply appeared, a ghost from the past with no history. This triggered a decades-long scientific duel, a battle between historians and chemists over the map's soul. The first major analysis in the 1970s focused on the ink. Researchers found traces of a synthetic compound called anatase titanium dioxide, a substance not commercially available until the 1920s. This finding pointed decisively toward a modern forgery, a clever fake created to capitalize on the value of such a revolutionary discovery. Case closed, it seemed. Yet, like any good mystery, new evidence emerged. Later, more sophisticated tests in the 2000s suggested the anatase could have formed naturally from medieval ink ingredients over centuries. Other studies of the parchment's wormholes and binding patterns argued it was part of a genuine 15th century book. The scientific testimony became contradictory, a chorus of experts singing different tunes. Historians, meanwhile, scrutinized the content. The map shows Greenland as an island, a fact not confirmed until the 19th century, an astonishing accuracy for a medieval cartographer. Yet, its depiction of Vinland is oddly shaped, almost an afterthought, placed awkwardly in the ocean. It feels less like a record from someone who had been there, and more like a scholar's attempt to fit a story from a saga onto a blank space on the page. This artifact forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable reality in historical research. The line between groundbreaking discovery and elaborate forgery can be impossibly thin. A skilled forger with access to old materials and deep historical knowledge can create a trap that ensnares the best of us for generations. The Vinland Map, whether a genuine medieval document or a 20th century masterpiece of deception, holds a mirror to our own desires. We want the past to be neat, to have clear pioneers and definitive firsts, but history is often messy, its truths whispered in fragments and contested in laboratories. The map's greatest lesson may not be about who discovered America, but about how carefully we must listen and how readily we must question even the evidence we most wish to believe. Centuries before Piri, Reis, or the Vinland Map, another mind was attempting to impose order on the entire known world. In the 2nd century, within the legendary Library of Alexandria, the scholar Claudius Ptolemy sat surrounded by scrolls of travel logs, sailors' reports, and older maps. His goal was not just to draw the world, but to create a mathematical system to define every place within it. He devised a grid of latitudes and longitudes, a coordinate system that would become the bedrock of Western cartography for over 1,000 years. His world map, reconstructed from his text Geographia, shows Europe, North Africa, and Asia with the expected distortions of his era. But if you look to the far right edge of his map, to the lands bordering the Indian Ocean and beyond, something strange emerges. Ptolemy labels a distant port called Katagara and a peninsula he calls the Golden Chersonese. According to his own longitudinal calculations, these places were far, far to the east. For centuries, scholars considered these locations pure myth, speculative geography filling the blank spaces. Then, a startling realization dawned. The Golden Chersonese bears a striking resemblance to the Malay Peninsula in Southeast Asia. Katagara might well be a port in Vietnam or southern China. The incredible part is not that Ptolemy knew these places existed, but that he placed them with a longitudinal accuracy that seems impossible for his time. He lacked the precise chronometers needed to calculate longitude accurately, a problem that would stump navigators until the 18th century. So how did he do it? The secret may lie in the very errors of his map. Cartographic historians note that Ptolemy's biggest mistake was underestimating the size of the Earth. He believed the planet was significantly smaller than it actually is. This miscalculation compressed his entire global grid. When he plotted locations reported by travelers, he placed them on his shrunken globe, which had the accidental effect of making distant eastern lands appear even farther east in longitude than they really are. Think of it like this: if you are told a city is a 10-day journey east, but you believe your world is only half as big, you will place that city much farther along on your map than it should be. This error is a crucial clue. It suggests Ptolemy was not inventing these distant locations. He was working from real data. His sources were likely Roman and Indian trade records, logs from merchants sailing the monsoon routes across the Indian Ocean to the spice markets of Southeast Asia. These sailors would have reported travel times and directions, which Ptolemy then translated imperfectly into his coordinate system. The precision of his longitudinal placement for Southeast Asia implies that the data was surprisingly good, that the Roman world was connected to Far Eastern trade networks more intimately than we often assume. Ptolemy's map, therefore, is a palimpsest of lost knowledge. Its distortions are not just mistakes, they are footprints. By tracing the specific ways his calculations went wrong, modern researchers can work backwards, attempting to discern the original, accurate reports that landed on his desk in Alexandria. He gave us a system that ruled for a millennium, but embedded within it was a ghostly outline of a world far wider than even he could fully comprehend. Within the hushed corridors of a Portuguese palace, a different kind of map was taking shape, one born not of ancient mystery but of urgent modern espionage. The year was 1502, and the race to claim the New World was a state secret of the highest order. Portugal guarded its discoveries like crown jewels, but secrets have a way of leaking. An Italian agent named Alberto Cantino, acting on behalf of the Duke of Ferrara, managed to bribe his way to a priceless treasure, a brand new world map commissioned by King Manuel I. Smuggled out of Lisbon, this document, known as the Cantino Planisphere, became one of the most consequential leaks in history, a snapshot of the world as Portugal knew it at that very moment. Its depiction of Africa and India is impressive, but it is the left side of the map, the western edge, that holds a silent bombshell. There, bulging into the Atlantic, is the coastline of Brazil, drawn with a startling, almost confident level of detail. The official story states that the Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral had first sighted this land just 2 years earlier, in 1500. So how, in the age of sail, without aerial surveys or satellites, could cartographers produce such an accurate and elaborate coastline in a mere 24 months? The map shows distinct bays, prominent capes, and the mouths of major rivers like the Amazon, all in roughly the correct positions. This is not a vague, speculative outline. It is the work of someone who had been there, someone who had taken careful notes. This speed and precision point to a possibility that makes historians lean forward. It suggests that Cabral's voyage was not a lucky accident, but a deliberate mission to a coast already known to exist. There may have been prior, unrecorded expeditions, voyages lost to official records but preserved in the whispers of sailors and the rough sketches of pilots. Some scholars point to the intriguing theory of the Ilha Brasil, a mythical island that appeared on some Atlantic charts even before Columbus. Could this myth have been based on fleeting sightings by ships blown off course, their reports filed away in secret Portuguese archives? Another compelling explanation involves the silent partners in every age of exploration, the indigenous peoples themselves. The Cantino map's accuracy, particularly regarding river systems, hints at the assimilation of local knowledge. Portuguese crews landing in Brazil would have interacted with Tupinambá communities, people who knew their own coastline intimately. Through gesture and demonstration, a vast library of geographical information could have been translated from lived experience into the lines and symbols of a European chart. This map, therefore, is a testament to a hidden truth of the age of discovery, that official history often announces a finding long after the maps have been quietly drawn. Nations played a deep game, hiding their true knowledge to maintain advantage over rivals. The Cantino Planisphere is that rare moment when the curtain was pulled back, revealing not just a new continent, but the sophisticated, secretive machinery of empire already hard at work, measuring and claiming a world it had only just begun to understand. The Cantino map revealed a world of state secrets, but the next artifact plunges us into a fog of family legend and phantom shores. In 1558, a descendant of a noble Venetian family published a map and a set of letters that told an astonishing story. He claimed they were based on the accounts of his ancestors, two brothers named Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, who had sailed into the treacherous North Atlantic in the late 1300s. The Zeno map that accompanied this tale is a cartographic fever dream, a place where fantasy and geography are indistinguishable. It shows a sprawling island named Friesland, south of Iceland, and another vast landmass called Estetiland far to the west. Neither of these places exist, yet nestled among these cartographic ghosts are the recognizable coasts of Greenland, Iceland, and possibly the northeastern tip of North America, drawn with a specificity that feels out of place among the inventions. This bizarre document has been dismissed as a clever 16th-century hoax, but its influence was shockingly real. Major cartographers for the next 200 years included Friesland on their maps, and explorers like John Cabot and Martin Frobisher actively searched for it, convinced it was a real destination. How could a map of imaginary lands steer the course of real exploration? The answer may lie in what the Zeno brothers or their descendant were actually copying. Many historians believe the core of the map is not a fabrication from whole cloth, but a distorted copy of genuine, much older Norse sailing charts. By the 1550s, the Norse settlements in Greenland had faded from memory, their detailed knowledge of the North Atlantic lost to mainland Europe. The Zeno account, whether based on real family papers or not, could have been an attempt to reconstruct this lost geography from fragments. The phantom island of Friesland might be a mismatched composite of the Shetland Islands, the Faroes, and even a missighted stretch of Greenland's coast, all blended together through generations of retelling. Estetiland could be a garbled version of reports about Markland or Vinland from the Norse sagas, lands to the west that were by then little more than rumor. The map's curious accuracy in some areas, like the jagged eastern coastline of Greenland, argues for a source with real navigational experience. It is as if a clear, technical diagram was passed down, then redrawn by someone who did not fully understand it, who filled the blank spaces with guesses and legends. The Zeno map forces us to see that for early cartographers, a blank space on the page was an existential problem. It was more comforting and more commercially viable to fill that void with a plausible fiction than to leave it empty. These phantoms, once inscribed on vellum, took on a life of their own, guiding ships and wasting fortunes in pursuit of shadows. The map is a powerful metaphor for how all history is written, a constant negotiation between hard evidence and the compelling stories we tell to make sense of the gaps. A French geographer in 1737 had never seen the southern continent, and no one else had either. Yet Philippe Buache, a master of theoretical cartography, drew a map of Antarctica that would wait 2 centuries for science to catch up. His chart did not show a single icy landmass, but 2 distinct continents separated by a narrow, frozen sea. He published this vision not as a report from explorers, but as a logical deduction, a hypothesis drawn from the patterns of the known world. Buache was a connector, a man who believed geography followed rules. He looked at the mountain ranges of the Americas, Europe, and Asia, and saw a global symmetry. He reasoned that landmasses often mirrored each other across oceans. Since there was land in the northern hemisphere, he postulated similar arrangements must exist in the south to balance the planet. His specific clue came from the logs of southern ocean navigators, who reported vast fields of icebergs. Buache theorized these icebergs must calve from immense glaciers, which in turn required massive landmasses to support them. By plotting where the greatest concentrations of ice were reported, he inferred the rough positions of these hidden southern lands. Then he took a breathtaking intuitive leap. He proposed that these 2 theoretical landmasses were separated by a frozen channel. When modern seismic surveys finally pierced the Antarctic ice sheet in the mid-20th century, they revealed a shocking truth. Beneath miles of solid ice, the continent is essentially divided into 2 major geological regions, East and West Antarctica, separated by the vast trench of the Transantarctic Mountains. Buache's frozen sea channel aligns almost perfectly with this subglacial geography. So was this an impossibly lucky guess from an armchair philosopher? The alignment is too precise to dismiss easily. It forces us to consider a tantalizing alternative, that Buache's brilliant deduction was subconsciously guided by older, fragmentary knowledge. As the royal geographer, he had access to France's vast archives, repositories that might have held copies of ancient charts like the Piri Reis map, or Portuguese and Spanish documents from the Age of Discovery that are now lost. His theoretical framework may have provided the perfect structure onto which he could fit these ghostly, half-remembered contours. Glaciologists note that his map's accuracy pertains to the bedrock, the land beneath the ice. This is the crucial detail. No sailor in 1737 could have known that shape. It was buried under frozen time. So the Buache map presents us with a profound choice. Do we celebrate it as a monumental victory of human reason, a mind using logic to see beyond the horizon? Or do we see it as the last echo of a much older whisper, a fragment of prehistoric geography preserved through copies and theories until it found a mind brilliant enough to give it form once more? It challenges our simplest assumption that a map must be drawn from observation. Sometimes the most accurate charts are born not from seeing, but from thinking, from connecting dots across centuries. Just 3 years after Piri Reis compiled his charts, a French mathematician presented the world with a vision of beauty and symmetry. Laurent Finé crafted a world map in 1531 that was a work of art drawn in the elegant shape of a heart. But within this graceful form lay a radical geographical claim. Dominating the southern hemisphere was an enormous speculative continent, labeled boldly as Terra Australis. This was not a new idea. The ancient Greeks had theorized a great southern land to balance the northern continents, a concept medieval scholars called the antipodes. Yet Finé did something no one had done before. He gave this phantom land a specific, tangible shape. He drew it with defined coastlines, interior mountain ranges, and rivers flowing from a central sea. He populated a complete unknown with the features of a real place, making the myth feel not just possible but inevitable. For the next 250 years, this compelling vision would haunt explorers, convincing them that a rich, temperate continent awaited discovery just beyond the ice. When we compare Finé's artistic rendering to the real southern continents, the overlaps are haunting but deeply puzzling. the western coast of his Terra Australis bears a passing, uncanny resemblance to the actual western coast of Australia. A prominent gulf on his map aligns roughly with the Great Australian Bight. Meanwhile, the southernmost peninsula he depicted points toward the general vicinity of Antarctica. So was this clairvoyance or coincidence? The scholarly consensus strongly favors coincidence, but of a very particular kind. Finé was a brilliant synthesizer, not an explorer. He was piecing together his map from every source he could find, from Ptolemy's ancient coordinates to the latest, fragmentary reports from Portuguese voyages into the Indian Ocean. It is highly probable that his western coastline is a distorted amalgamation of early, secretive sightings of Australia's northern and western shores, reports that were filtering into European capitals but not yet public knowledge. These sketchy accounts, when fitted onto his heart-shaped projection designed for mathematical elegance, could have produced a shape that accidentally mirrors reality. The mountains and rivers he drew in the interior are a different matter. These are not based on observation, but on philosophical necessity. Renaissance thinkers believed in a world of perfect order, where lands must have features like inland seas to feed rivers. Finé was essentially filling in the blanks according to the rules of his time, creating a geographically plausible fantasy. This is the true power and danger of theoretical cartography. By giving abstract belief a concrete form, Finé's map created a target. It told generations of sailors exactly what to look for, shaping their expectations and ultimately their interpretations of what they found. When Dutch explorers later encountered Australia's arid western edges, they were disappointed. It did not match the lush, balanced continent of the maps. The map had promised a mirror to Europe, but reality offered something far stranger. Finé's beautiful heart thus represents a pivotal moment in our relationship with the unknown. It marks the point where ancient theory, whispered intelligence, and artistic license fused into a single image so convincing it could redirect the course of history, sending ships toward mirages that, every so often, turned out to be real shores. While European cartographers speculated about southern continents, a masterpiece of a different kind was being created on the other side of the world. In the royal court of Joseon, Korea, in the year 1402, scholars presented a map of such breathtaking scope it defied its own era. Known as the Kangnido, its full title translates to the Map of Integrated Lands and Regions of Historical Countries and Capitals. It was a vision of the entire Old World, from the Atlantic shores of Europe and Africa to the distant islands of Japan, all rendered with a coherence and detail that would not appear in European atlases for another century. This was not a map of exploration, but of synthesis, a crowning achievement of intellectual exchange along the Silk Road. To look at the Kangnido is to see the world through the lens of a connected 14th century, a perspective where Korea sits not at the edge, but at the center of a vast known geography. Its creation was a direct product of the Mongol Empire's Pax Mongolica, that century of relative stability where goods, ideas, and people flowed freely from the Mediterranean to the Sea of Japan. Korean envoys, scholars, and merchants traveled to the Yuan dynasty court in China, bringing back with them a treasure trove of knowledge, including maps. The Kangnido's primary sources, as noted by East Asian historians, were two now lost Chinese world maps from the Yuan era. These Chinese maps, in turn, almost certainly incorporated geographic knowledge from the Islamic world, carried eastward by Persian and Arab astronomers and traders who served the Mongol Khans. This layered heritage explains the map's most startling features. Most striking is its depiction of Africa. The continent is shown with a broadly triangular shape, oriented with its point to the south. While not perfectly accurate, this is a radical departure from the bizarre, squashed representations common in contemporary European portolan charts. Even more precisely, the map shows the Nile River with its two major tributaries flowing from twin lakes south of the equator, a detail that aligns with Arab geographical knowledge of the time but was utterly unknown in the West. How did Korean cartographers thousands of miles away know the basic form of Africa and the course of its greatest river decades before Portuguese caravels began charting its western coast? The answer lies in the invisible highways of information that preceded the age of European sail. Arab house ships had been trading down the East African coast for centuries, reaching as far as Mozambique. Their navigational charts and travelogues, filled with descriptions of the continent's shape and river systems, circulated through scholarly networks in Cairo, Baghdad, and Samarkand. When the Mongols conquered much of the Islamic world, they absorbed its scholars and their libraries into their administration. This knowledge then migrated east along the overland routes, eventually reaching the mapmakers of China and Korea. The Kangnido, therefore, is not a mysterious anomaly, but a documented snapshot of a globalized medieval world. It proves that comprehensive geographic understanding was not a European invention, but a collective human achievement, woven together from Chinese, Islamic, and Central Asian threads. It challenges the Eurocentric narrative of discovery by presenting a quiet, sophisticated counterpoint, a map that knew the world's contours long before European voyages filled in the blanks. This Korean masterpiece asks us to reconsider not just what was known, but where knowledge resided, reminding us that the center of the world depends entirely on where you choose to stand. A single word printed on a map in a small German workshop in 1507 would echo for centuries. Martin Waldseemüller's Great World Chart is famous for that one act, for labeling the newfound southern continent, America, after the explorer Amerigo Vespucci. But to focus only on the name is to miss the map's true and far more baffling revolution. For there, stretching between the New World and Asia, Waldseemüller depicted a vast, empty ocean. He showed the Pacific as a distinct and separate body of water, a full 6 years before the European explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa would famously wade into its eastern surf and claim it for Spain. This was not just a lucky guess, it was a staggering conceptual leap that redrew the mental geography of the entire planet. The question is simple and profound: how did he know? Waldseemüller and his collaborator Matthias Ringmann were scholars, not sailors. They worked in the landlocked town of Saint-Dié, hundreds of miles from any port. Their map was based on the latest reports they could gather, chiefly the published letters of Amerigo Vespucci, which described sailing along a seemingly endless coast. In those accounts, Vespucci wrote of a new world, a phrase that clearly resonated with the cartographers. But Vespucci never described a Western Ocean, he only charted the Atlantic coastline. To get from that coastline to a map showing the Pacific required a brilliant, almost intuitive act of reasoning. One compelling theory is that Waldseemüller performed a feat of intellectual geometry. He knew the approximate span of the Eurasian continent from Ptolemy's old maps. When he plotted the new lands described by Vespucci and others, he realized they stretched too far south to be mere appendages of Asia, as Columbus had believed. There had to be a gap, a space for another ocean to separate the two. By correctly interpreting the scale of the discoveries, he deduced the existence of the ocean that must lie beyond them. It was a solution drawn from logic, filling a blank space not with fantasy but with necessity. Yet other historians suspect a more clandestine source. The early 1500s were a time of intense, secretive rivalry. Portuguese ships were pushing deeper into the Indian Ocean, and Italian bankers financed expeditions whose full findings were closely guarded secrets. It is entirely possible that Waldseemüller, through academic or mercantile connections in cosmopolitan centers, saw confidential reports or sketch maps hinting at a sea route south of the new continent. A single, smuggled document showing the tip of South America curving eastward could have been the key, suggesting an open passage to another ocean. Whatever his sources, the impact of his vision was immediate and tectonic. The Waldseemüller map presented for the first time in print a world with 4 distinct parts: Europe, Africa, Asia, and this new 4th continent, America, all surrounded by water. It shattered the old, closed world of Ptolemy and presented a planet that was open, expansive, and far larger than anyone had dreamed. In that moment, a German scholar in a remote workshop did not just name a continent. He correctly predicted the fundamental structure of the globe, seeing a truth that exploration would spend the next 2 centuries laboriously confirming. His map was a flash of insight so bright it illuminated the future, proving that sometimes to see across the world, you only need to connect the dots left behind by those who had been there. In the bustling maritime Republic of Venice, another world was being drawn inside a perfect circle. The Virga World Map, crafted between 1411 and 1415, is a stunning artifact of medieval synthesis, a single surviving copy of a vision that balanced emerging fact with enduring tradition. Its form is immediately striking, a beautiful circular disc framed by concentric rings of wind and zodiac symbols, a design rooted in the classical medieval TO map schema that divided the world into 3 continents. Yet within this traditional framework, the details are startlingly modern. The coastlines of Europe, particularly the Mediterranean, are rendered with a precision that rivals the best portolan sailing charts of the era. The Red Sea is painted a vivid crimson, and the Indian Ocean is populated with islands and ports described by merchants who had actually been there. This map is a hybrid, a bridge between the symbolic world of the scholar and the practical, mile-by-mile knowledge of the sailor. Its creator almost certainly had access to and skillfully incorporated the advanced techniques of Arab and Catalan cartographers. These portolan charts, used for actual navigation, were dense networks of room lines and coastal details drawn from first-hand experience. The Virga map lifts this practical coastline data and sets it within a cosmological diagram, attempting to reconcile 2 very different ways of seeing the Earth. One of its most intriguing features is its treatment of distant Asia, lands far beyond the direct experience of any Venetian. Here, the influence of perhaps the most famous traveler of all time becomes apparent. The map includes place names in Central Asia that align closely with the descriptions from Marco Polo's account, which had been circulating in Europe for over a century. A city called Cambaluc, Polo's name for Beijing, appears along with references to the wealth of Cathay. This tells us the mapmaker was not just a draftsman, but a compiler of texts, weaving written travelogues into a visual format. Then there is the puzzling southern island. Below the Indian subcontinent, the Virga depicts a large, oddly shaped island. This could be a massively distorted representation of Sri Lanka, a key hub in the Indian Ocean spice trade whose size and importance were often exaggerated in reports. Alternatively, it might tap into the persistent legend of a great southern island, a place of wealth and mystery whispered about in harbors from Alexandria to Genoa. This single feature encapsulates the map's entire nature. It is a document where hard geographic data, learned from Arab sailors who knew the monsoon routes, blends seamlessly with the legendary and the half-understood. Scholars of medieval trade see maps like Virga not as attempts to show objective truth, but as functional compilations. They were databases of commercial and travel law, created for merchants and diplomats who needed to understand a connected world. Every accurately placed port on the Red Sea coast represents a trade contact, a partnership, a source of pepper or silk. Every mythical island in the Indian Ocean represents an opportunity, a blank space on the ledger waiting to be filled with profit. The map's survival in just one copy hints at its value. It was a proprietary tool, a secret weapon of statecraft and commerce. Its elegant circle was not just an artistic choice, it was a statement that all this scattered, fragmentary knowledge, from Polo's fantastical stories to a sailor's bearing, could be contained, understood, and owned. It presents a world that is at once known and unknown, measured and imagined, a perfect mirror to the mind of its era. Venice in 1559 was a marketplace of ideas as much as spices, a place where any map could find a publisher and an audience. From this vibrant crossroads emerged one of the most visually arresting and geographically baffling charts ever printed, the work of a cartographer known as Hadji Ahmed. His map of the world is a riot of color and ornate decoration, but its true shock lies in the cold, hard lines of geography. There, on the left edge of the page, is the western coastline of the Americas, drawn with a specificity that should not have been possible. It shows the distinct, cragged outline of Alaska and the intricate network of islands along the Pacific Northwest, a region Europeans would not systematically explore for another 200 years. The Bering Strait appears as a narrow passage, and the coast curves downward with a recognition of California's peninsula that feels eerily prescient. It is as if the cartographer had access to a viewpoint from high above the earth, a perspective no ship of his century could provide. This impossible vantage point has fueled one of the wildest theories in alternative history, the suggestion that the map was drawn from an aerial or even satellite-like view. Proponents point to the way coastal features align from a high altitude, as if someone had traced them from a photograph. While this idea captures the imagination, cartographic historians offer a more grounded, though no less fascinating, explanation rooted in the messy reality of how maps were made. The Hadji Ahmed map is not a clean, singular vision. It is a compilation, a patchwork. Expert analysis reveals its genius and its flaws side by side. Certain stretches of coast, like Alaska, are rendered with startling accuracy in their general shape and orientation. Yet other areas, like the interior of North America, collapse into pure guesswork and mythical geography, with giant lakes and non-existent mountain ranges. This combination of precision and fantasy is the classic signature of a mapmaker working from multiple, contradictory sources. He was fitting together puzzle pieces from different boxes, some sharply detailed, others blank or wildly incorrect. So where did these precise pieces come from? The most plausible answer lies in the vast, silent exchange of knowledge that occurred wherever cultures met. By 1559, Spanish galleons had been plying the Pacific coast of the Americas for decades. While their official maps might not have shown this level of detail, secret pilot charts, called derroteros, certainly existed. These were hand-drawn, closely guarded documents made by ship pilots for their own use, recording every bay, headland, and safe anchorage. A single such chart, smuggled or sold, could have found its way to a Venetian publisher. Even more compelling is the potential role of indigenous knowledge. The Tlingit, Haida, and other peoples of the Pacific Northwest had mastered their complex maritime world for millennia. They understood the coastline, the islands, and the currents in a way no European sailor could. Through trade contacts, perhaps in Spanish settlements, or via Russian explorers already probing from Siberia, fragments of this deep geographical understanding could have been transferred, sketched on hides or in the sand, and later incorporated into a European framework. The map's strange distortions might then be the result of trying to merge a native mental map, which emphasizes relationships and travel times, with the rigid latitude and longitude grid of Renaissance cartography. The Hadji Ahmed map ultimately stands as a haunting monument to lost information. It is a single, surviving echo from a chorus of voices that have since fallen silent: the indigenous guides, the Spanish pilots, the merchants who carried secrets across oceans. Its bizarre accuracy alongside its obvious errors tells us that the past was not less knowledgeable but differently informed. It forces us to confront a sobering truth that for every document that survives in an archive, countless others have turned to dust, taking with them entire chapters of human discovery. This map is a ghost, a reminder that what we call history is only the fraction of the story that managed to avoid the fire, the flood, or simply the passage of time. Gerardus Mercator gave us the map that shaped our modern world. His famous projection of 1569, the one that stretches Greenland to impossible sizes, was designed for sailors, a tool to plot straight lines across a curved planet. Yet in that same year, he crafted another, far stranger map, a detailed chart of the Arctic that reveals a mind caught between brilliant science and enduring myth. This northern map shows a ring of known lands, Scandinavia, Iceland, Greenland, but at its very center, at the point where all lines of longitude converge, lies a geography of pure imagination. A colossal black mountain rises from the sea, the Rupes Nigra, surrounded by 4 equally massive islands separated by fierce channels flowing inward. This was not a guess, Mercator insisted. In meticulous notes he cited his source, a now-lost medieval travelogue titled the Inventio Fortunata, or the Fortunate Discovery. This 14th-century text, reportedly written by a Franciscan friar, described a journey to the top of the world, where a magnetic black rock 33 miles in circumference pulled the very needles of compasses toward it. Mercator, the father of scientific cartography, had faithfully copied a fairy tale onto his grid. Historians tracing this peculiar thread believe the Inventio Fortunata itself was likely a compilation of older sailors' yarns, Norse sagas, and classical legends about the edges of the earth. The concept of a magnetic mountain pulling ships to their doom was an ancient maritime fear, and the idea of a whirlpool or maelstrom at the pole, which Mercator also depicted, stretches back to Greek mythology. What makes this case so fascinating is the process it reveals. A respected scholar, seeking to create the most accurate picture possible, encounters an authoritative sounding source from a previous age. Without the means to verify it, he incorporates its claims into his masterwork, thereby lending his own immense credibility to the legend. The myth becomes fossilized, presented with the same sober precision as the coastline of Norway. This speaks to a deeper Renaissance belief about the world's structure. Scholars of the era were convinced the poles must be places of immense geological drama, with giant lodestones or openings to other realms, necessary to explain the behavior of compasses and the balance of the cosmos. Mercator's Arctic map is therefore a perfect snapshot of a transitional moment, where the drive for empirical accuracy collided head-on with the powerful weight of inherited tradition. It shows us that even the most rigorous minds are products of their time, filtering all information, both true and fantastical, through the accepted wisdom of their age. The Rupes Nigra never existed, yet for centuries it stood unchallenged at the top of the world, a solemn reminder that every map is not just a record of what is there, but a portrait of what the mapmaker and his culture believed must be there. King Roger II of Sicily demanded a new kind of map. In his cosmopolitan court in Palermo, where Norman, Arab, Greek, and Jewish scholars worked side by side, he commissioned a project of staggering ambition. He tasked the brilliant Muslim geographer Al-Idrisi with a simple, monumental directive: synthesize all the world's known geography into a single, definitive work. The result, completed in 1154, was the Tabula Rogeriana, a book of 70 detailed sectional maps accompanied by a vast compendium of text called the Book of Pleasant Journeys into Faraway Lands. To look at this map today is to experience a moment of cognitive vertigo, for Al-Idrisi oriented his world with the south at the top. This was not an error, but a deliberate choice rooted in the Islamic cartographic tradition, a reminder that our north-up convention is just that, a convention. This reorientation alone forces the viewer to see the world through a different cultural lens, one where the focus flows naturally toward the heartlands of Islam and the Indian Ocean trade. The map's true genius, however, lies in its breathtaking detail. particularly of regions that were mere blank spaces or monstrous fantasies on European charts of the same era. Al-Idrisi depicted the continent of Africa with a realism that would not be matched in the West for centuries. He accurately described the great Niger River, not as a short stream flowing east to west as many ancients believed, but correctly showing its great bend, where it flows northward toward the Sahara before turning sharply south again to empty into the Atlantic. This knowledge almost certainly came from the trans-Saharan caravan networks, where Berber and Arab traders had crossed the desert for generations, exchanging salt for gold and gathering precise travel lore. Even more striking is his treatment of the East African coast, which he labels the land of the Zanj. He charts its ports and islands with a specificity that reveals intimate, first-hand acquaintance. This was the domain of the Swahili city-states, a vibrant network of trading ports like Kilwa and Mombasa, connected by the monsoon winds to Arabia, Persia, India, and beyond. How captains had been sailing these routes for ages, and their accumulated navigational wisdom, passed down through pilot guides and roomline charts, flowed directly into Al-Idrisi's work. His text even mentions lands beyond this, like the mysterious Wak-Wak Islands, which some scholars interpret as references to Madagascar or even the distant Malay archipelago, hinting at the far reach of Indian Ocean trade gossip. The Tabula Rogeriana stands as a systematic, encyclopedic triumph. Al-Idrisi did not just draw, he compiled, cross-referenced, and verified. He and King Roger's team interviewed travelers, consulted older Greek and Persian texts, and scrutinized the accounts of living merchants. This was geography treated as a rigorous science of collective human experience. While European mappamundi of the 12th century were often symbolic diagrams showing Jerusalem at the center and populated with biblical beasts, Al-Idrisi was producing a practical, information-rich document intended for a ruler who saw the world as a connected, knowable system. This map reveals a parallel stream of advanced global knowledge, one that flowed through the libraries of Baghdad and the harbors of Aden, a stream that preserved and refined geographic truths while much of Europe was still drawing dragons at the edge of the world. It is a powerful testament to a moment when a curious Christian king and a brilliant Muslim scholar collaborated to produce a vision of the planet that was, for its time, unparalleled in its accuracy and scope. Their work whispers that the path to true understanding has never belonged to one culture alone, but is woven from the threads of every traveler's tale and every trader's logbook. Bianco's hands knew the feel of salt spray and the pull of a tiller long before they ever held a compass rose. In 1436, this Venetian sailor turned his practical knowledge into a stunning portolan chart, a map drawn for use, not for show. Its heart is a masterful web of room lines radiating across the perfectly rendered Mediterranean, a testament to generations of accumulated pilot lore. But it is at the map's western edge, in the blank expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, where Bianco's chart leaps from the practical into the realm of haunting speculation. There, floating in the unknown sea, he drew a series of islands with strange, evocative names. Two stand out like sirens calling from the mist, Antalya and Satanas. These were not part of any known geography, yet they were placed with a cartographer's conviction, as real as Sicily or Sardinia. For over a century, these phantom islands would live on the page, shaping the dreams of explorers and the desperate hopes of kings. What were they? To the practical sailor Bianco, they may have been little more than cartographic placeholders, standard symbols for rumored lands that every mariner had heard about in portside taverns. The name Antalya itself likely derives from a Portuguese legend of the Island of the Seven Cities, a mythical refuge for bishops fleeing the Muslim conquest of Iberia. Satanas, meaning of the devils, perhaps echoed terrifying sailors' yarns of hostile natives or treacherous seas. Yet the persistence and specific placement of these islands on multiple charts, including Bianco's, suggests a more intriguing possibility. Could they be the badly garbled, second-hand reports of real lands far to the west? Some researchers have proposed that Antalya is a distorted reflection of the Azores, sighted but not yet fully settled by the Portuguese in Bianco's time. Others see in its rectangular shape a possible, crude representation of the large islands of the Caribbean, like Cuba or Hispaniola, their true outlines lost in translation across 1,000 miles of ocean and through who knows how many retellings. This idea of a garbled report is key to understanding how these maps worked. Nautical historians emphasize that portolan charts like Bianco's were living documents. They were not drawn once and forgotten, they were constantly annotated, updated, and copied. When a ship returned to Lisbon or Genoa, the pilot would report his findings, perhaps sketching a rough coastline on a scrap of parchment. That new data, however fragmentary, would then be incorporated into the master copies held by chart makers. A report of a large landmass seen on the horizon could, over decades of copying and imperfect communication, shrink into an island, its shape simplified, its location approximated. A story from a Norse saga about Helluland, the land of flat stones, could morph into the Island of Devils on an Italian map. This process turns Bianco's speculative Atlantic from mere fantasy into a potential archive of lost whispers. His map became a crucial piece in a grand, real-world puzzle. We know that Christopher Columbus studied charts like this intensely in the decades before his fateful voyage. He read the works of geographers who cited Bianco and others, and he filled the margins of his own books with notes about Antalya, calculating its supposed distance from Europe. For Columbus, these phantom islands were not myths, they were evidence, clues that land lay within a plausible sailing range across the ocean sea. They provided the intellectual courage, or perhaps the desperate rationale, he needed to secure funding and crew. In this light, Andrea Bianco's map is a powerful symbol of the slow, collective dawn of discovery. It represents the moment when the hard-won, precise knowledge of the known world, the room-lined Mediterranean, began to push against the vast unknown. The sailors' practical need for accurate coasts met the explorers' yearning for what lay beyond. Every strange island drawn on vellum was a question mark that demanded an answer, a blank space that begged to be filled not with more speculation, but with a ship's log. Bianco did not know he was drawing ghosts that would guide men to continents, but in his careful ink lines we see the practical beginning of a new world being imagined, one mysterious island at a time. A final, fading whisper comes not from a royal court but from a remote Icelandic farm. Around 1590, a man named Sigurd Stefansson, likely a teacher or scholar, drew a simple, stark map. Its purpose was not navigation but education, a visual aid to teach local students about the legendary lands their ancestors had reached centuries before. On a crude parchment, he sketched a long, narrow island labeled Greenland. To its west, he placed three more landmasses in a rough, descending line: Helluland, Markland, and Vinland. To our modern eyes, these names are keys to a locked door, directly lifted from the Norse sagas that told of Leif Eriksson's voyages around the year 1000. The map's power lies in its heartbreaking simplicity. It shows no interior detail, no rivers or mountains, only the barest outlines of coastlines. Yet, when placed against the map of northeastern North America, a ghostly correspondence emerges. Greenland is recognizably elongated. Helluland, described in the sagas as a land of flat stones, aligns with the rocky, barren coasts of Baffin Island. Markland, the land of forests, matches the timbered shores of Labrador, and far to the south, Vinland, the land of wild grapes, points toward the Gulf of St. Lawrence region, possibly Newfoundland. This is not the precise charting of an explorer, but the stylized memory of a community. Sigurd Stefansson was drawing not from first-hand experience, but from stories, from songs, from a cultural tradition that had kept these names alive for 600 years after the last Norse ship had sailed back from those western shores. Norse scholars who study this map see it not as a geographic document, but as a folk artifact. Its runic inscriptions are not navigational notes, but labels from the epic tales. The map's very existence in late 16th century Iceland is a minor miracle. The Norse settlements in Greenland had vanished, succumbing to a changing climate and isolation, their final fate a quiet mystery. All direct contact with the lands to the west had been lost for generations, yet the memory persisted, passed down like a cherished heirloom, its details worn smooth by time but its core shape still intact. The Stefansson map is therefore a poignant echo of a lost world. It represents knowledge in its most resilient and fragile form, cultural memory. It proves that information can survive not in archives or on stone, but in the stories a people tell about themselves, in the names they give to half-forgotten places. This simple sketch is the last cartographic sigh of the Viking westward venture, a final statement that they had been there, that they had seen those forests and shores long before the age of Columbus. It brings our journey through these 15 maps to a deeply human close. We have seen impossible coastlines drawn from lost sources and theoretical continents predicted by logic. We have witnessed state secrets leaked onto parchment and phantom islands guiding real ships. But the Stefansson map brings us back to the most fundamental vessel of all, the human story. It reminds us that every line on every map begins not with a pen, but with a person standing on a shore, looking at a horizon, and then returning home to tell the tale. The maps that reveal unknown geography do so because someone once knew it, and sometimes against all odds, that knowledge finds a way to whisper across the centuries, waiting for us to listen. 15 maps present us with a gallery of riddles, but the greatest puzzle lies in how to solve them. Stepping back from the individual artifacts, we are left with two grand, competing narratives that attempt to explain the impossible. The first, often called diffusionist theory, suggests a single, unifying source for this scattered knowledge. Its most famous proponent, Professor Charles Hapgood, argued that these maps preserve fragments of a much older, advanced global survey, perhaps conducted by a prehistoric civilization with seafaring capabilities we have since forgotten. This idea proposes a lost golden age, a network of explorers who charted the world thousands of years before the pharaohs, their maps copied and recopied until only distorted echoes remained in medieval times. It is a story of catastrophic loss, of a library of human achievement burned to ashes, leaving only a few charred pages behind. On the other side stands the skeptical, conventional view held by most academic historians and archaeologists. This perspective sees not a single lost source, but 1,000 small, logical ones. It attributes the map's startling accuracy to a combination of brilliant synthesis, serendipitous error, and the slow, relentless accumulation of knowledge through trade and contact. From this viewpoint, Reis did not copy an ancient Antarctic chart. He creatively combined Portuguese reports of South America with mythical southern lands. The precise Pacific Northwest coast on the Hadji Ahmed map came not from satellites, but from a forgotten Spanish derrotero or a sketch shared by an indigenous trader. Here, every anomaly has a mundane, if complex, explanation rooted in the messy reality of human communication. Experts from both camps offer compelling arguments. A diffusionist might quote the archaeologist who notes, "The consistent precision in certain features across disparate cultures and times hints at a common, technical source that has since vanished from the record." A mainstream historian counters, human beings are exceptional pattern finders, and we often see connections in random noise, a tendency that can lead us to weave coincidences into grand conspiracies of history. To weigh these theories, we must consider the silent actors and the great voids in our story. The role of indigenous informants cannot be overstated. Every European ship that made landfall relied on local knowledge, from the Tupinambá in Brazil to the Polynesian navigators of the Pacific. This deep, place-based understanding, transferred through gesture, artifact, or captured guides, could be rapidly and accurately incorporated into European charts, appearing as miraculous insight to those back home. Then there are the gaps, the libraries that burned. The Great Library of Alexandria was not the only repository lost. Countless archives in Baghdad, Constantinople, and Tenochtitlan were destroyed by conflict, time, or deliberate erasure. Each held maps and logs that could have filled the blanks in our timeline. The loss of these documents means our historical record is not a complete book, but a palimpsest with more empty pages than written ones. This absence makes certainty impossible. The human mind naturally seeks a single, elegant solution. A lost civilization makes for a captivating story that ties all the loose ends together. Yet history is rarely elegant. It is a tangled web of chance encounters, misunderstood reports, and lucky mistakes. Perhaps the truth lies not in choosing one camp over the other, but in the vast, uncharted sea between them. Some maps may indeed be lucky guesses, others clever forgeries, but could a few, just a handful, be genuine messages in a bottle, tossed from a shore we no longer remember? The evidence does not force a conclusion, it invites a question. It asks us to hold two conflicting ideas in our minds at once, that our ancestors were both more connected and more brilliantly intuitive than we often credit, and that the past is always more mysterious than any textbook can contain. Our journey across these 15 ancient maps reveals a world history far more interconnected and enigmatic than textbooks often suggest. From the ice-free coasts on Piri rises parchment to the Norse memories on Stefansson's sketch. These documents are more than old paper, they are puzzles begging to be solved. They remind us that history is not a linear narrative but a palimpsest, a manuscript where earlier knowledge is often erased or written over, yet faint traces of the original text still show through. Each of these maps is a layer in that manuscript, a whisper from a time when the world's edges were drawn not just from observation, but from story, logic, and fragments of lost information. We stand today at the end of a long chain of copying and interpretation, trying to read the faint ink of a first draft we can no longer see. The central question is not merely how a single map got one detail right, but why so many, from such different times and cultures, contain these startling glimpses of a world they should not have known. This pattern suggests our past was woven with threads of exchange and discovery that our modern narratives have simply failed to follow to their source. Indigenous guides, Arab traders, Norse explorers, and anonymous pilots all carried pieces of the puzzle, and sometimes those pieces survived against all odds, finding their way onto the desk of a scholar or a sailor who dared to include them. While we may never fully unravel how these mapmakers knew what they knew, their collective work presents an enduring challenge. It asks us to hold our certainties lightly, to accept that the story of human exploration is far richer and more incomplete than any single timeline can capture. These artifacts celebrate the depth of human curiosity, that relentless drive to look over the horizon and, upon returning, to try and make sense of what was seen, even if the tools were imperfect and the sources half forgotten. Let these maps inspire you to look deeper into the past, to question the neat borders we draw around history. Which of these 15 mysteries compels you the most? Was it the theoretical continent of Buache, the secret coastlines of the Cantino map, or the simple, haunting memory of Vinland? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into history's greatest enigmas.